It's also as well, like, I took myself to A&E once because of an abusive relationship and stuff. It wasn't physical or anything, but it kind of made my mental health a lot worse. I said to the person there about the stuff that was going on with my partner, and she was like, oh, well, maybe you should just go home and make him a nice playlist. I'm like, what's that going to do? Then literally 3 weeks later, I was in because of an overdose. They didn't bother to think, oh, hang on a minute, you did try here. They're just like, oh, well, you didn't seem as bad then. Or what will happen sometimes, I've had in notes, is that it will say that I'm adequately dressed. And I'm like, people could be in a ball gown and still be in crisis. Like, something could have happened for them to get in crisis. What they're wearing got to do with it?
So that's interesting to hear that was highlighted in a way, because you're right, that brings in more bias. Because when you think of well-dressed, I feel like you imagine well off, and then well off means a lot of things, and mentally well off is one of them.
I mean, I was literally just, I think I was in like a hoodie, t-shirt and jeans. Like, I'm like, that's just casual stuff. But yeah, I think like it's going back to that kind of checkbox thing where they're not looking at what's actually going on. It's like, okay, are they meeting this? Or I think for me as well, sometimes what would happen is that I'm like, okay, I need to get help, so I'm going to try and be more articulate, as articulate as I can. But that will come across as like, oh, you seem fine.
Right.
I'm like, well, I'm not. I'm just trying to make sure I'm giving you the right information. And I think the trouble with BPD as well is like kind of frequent mood swings. I could take myself to A&E or whatever because I'm feeling suicidal. I could be sat there and then the kind of suicidal thoughts might have like dipped a bit. So then it seems like I'm fine, but then I could leave there and be a wreck again. And especially if it is like external things, if it is like having a breakup or somebody saying something negative, like it's quite quick for those triggers to happen. It's one of those things where like, obviously, like again, like I kind of want to kind of highlight what the system is like, but at the same time, I don't want to scare people away. You know, those services are there for a reason. They are there to help. I think it's just unfortunate that people's experiences haven't been great with them. And because that's as a result of stigma, or again, maybe inadequate training. And I think it's great to do things like this to kind of get kind of a real midway point as well, to be like, okay, so what can we do differently? Just because like, I understand like people are experts for a reason, but then it's like, that then they'll kind of use that as a way to invalidate someone's...
Right, because you're the expert on the topic, you're not the expert on the person. The person who's in their life is the expert of their own experience. So they kind of...
I think also...
use that.
I think as well, like some of like society's preconceptions of things. I used to go to this thing called Recovery College, and what they teach you to do on some of the things is to build like a wellness recovery action plan. And in that, it has your crisis plan. So in there, it says who to contact, who not to contact, where you might be able to stay. Because unfortunately, what a lot of people do, so for example, you know, like with my family, like people will assume, oh, he's in trouble, let's contact his family, when it could have been them that put me in that position. But people be like, oh no, but that's your family, that's who we need to contact, not realizing that can make the person worse. So I think it's trying to challenge those things, those kind of, I don't even know if it's biases, but challenging those perceptions of what a support network is. What you get with some abusive people is this kind of fake concern. So they may suddenly rush to the hospital to see if you're okay, but they don't actually care if you're okay. They're just, again, just trying to do it to make it look like they're a decent person. Or so I've learned this from people as well, where like you think of like a toxic friend as somebody that's only there during the good stuff.
The way,
but it could also be, but it can also be the other way around. So it's like, oh, if I swoop in and act like the hero, people are going to think I'm a decent person, but then they fuck off after a week, or they kind of do things, again, not thinking about you. I think a time previous, they got a friend to cover their shift. They wanted to visit me in hospital. I was at home at this point. I had not heard from this person. So they just did it to get out of work. From the outside, people are like, oh, they just care about him. Oh, they just want to make sure he's okay.
Right.
When they're not seeing the truth of the situation. And so I think it's important to listen to people if they're in a crisis, to say, do not contact my mum, or do not contact this friend, do not contact this partner. Again, it could have been them that's put them in that position. And I think that should be listened to.
I mean, that is a good point, to kind of be smart about these people's intentions. But also on the other hand, you know, earlier you mentioned having too many boundaries. And that was like, well, I went through all of this and I kind of learned these people had these intentions and this is what it looked like. But there are all of these boundaries now for this new person coming in. And, oh, well, they took a day off work, so maybe they're doing it too. And so I feel like you have to kind of, it's hard, it's really hard to be like, hold on, new person, new situation, we're starting off from square one, everyone, like all the brain cells have to stop firing, like.
I think again that's the thing. I think because I was a bit like that with my partner in the beginning, where I was like, oh, he's done this thing, this is what this person's done in the past, so that means he's the same person. Again, like the thing where like his bedroom was the same color as an ex-partner's, because of trauma responses and stuff, I literally thought it was the same situation again. But I think also sometimes you forget that it's your own experience. So I think because, I don't know if this is the right way to explain it, but because my experiences were quite loud, like I experienced it, that's what I knew what happened. I'm like, how can people not see that? Like, it's very clear to me, even if you do try and point it out, like, understanding that people do have different perceptions. I think that's the other thing I've learned as well, though, is that like, okay, people may get on with some of my family members and stuff or whatever, but I think what I've learned is that if I can tell somebody this person did this, but it's not down to me to be like, oh, you can't talk to this person or whatever. Like, again, that's their own responsibility, that's their own life, but that's for me to be like, okay, do I want this person in my life, or is there certain stuff I just don't talk to them about because they're still interacting with this said person? Because I think weirdly I've had it with a family member where them and another family member never got on. They'd get pissed off that I even just left a comment on a Facebook post, and I'm like, what's between you two is between you two, that has nothing to do with me. But it'll be a more passive aggressive thing where it's like, oh, I see you're best friends with this person. I'm like, I left one comment. That's what made it hard for me to learn about kind of personal responsibility for a long time. So I felt like, oh, that person, oh, this person doesn't like this person, so I can't talk to them. Or what will happen is that they'll both be bitching about each other to you, and then you might say one thing, and then they're going to each other being like, oh, Bryan said this, like this one thing. I'm like, are you going to say that you're bitching about each other to me? It was always this kind of like triangulation sort of thing. I've learned that I do have a lot of boundaries. It is, I think, from a place of kind of safety when people have been through trauma, abuse, bullying, and they do start to unlearn stuff or start to build these boundaries. I think, yeah, it's out with that safety and to kind of be like, okay, I don't want this to happen again. But I think it comes down to building that trust. Because, you know, like boundaries can change over time, but if somebody's like, well, I don't like this boundary of yours, I'm like, that's fine. You don't have to like it. It's still there, whether you agree with it or not. This is for me, not for you. I mean, to a point, obviously, it is for them to like, so you can have a good relationship, friendship, whatever. But to say somebody to be like, okay, I don't like when you call me names or whatever, for them to be like, nah, I'm still gonna do it. I think it's that whole kind of gaslighting, oh, you're just being too sensitive, you can't take a joke. You know, there's a difference between, you know, like having a bit of banter with somebody, I hate that word, but having a bit of banter with somebody versus like, I think sometimes you can tell that it's a sly insult when it's stuff they know you're insecure about.
Yeah.
And
or like, the situation, right? Like if you're alone or if you're at a pub on a Friday night, that's a little different.
I think also main difference, I think it's often how people react to those boundaries rather than the boundaries themselves, in a sense. Because so if somebody did make a joke that was insensitive and you were like, oh, actually, I don't like this being joked about. If somebody's like, oh shit, I didn't realize, like, I'm really sorry, I'll do my best for that not to happen again, that's fine. But if you say to them, oh, I don't like this part of me being joked about, and they start being like, oh, you're too sensitive, you can't take a joke, then that's where you're like, okay, got to figure something out here.
Reset, yeah. And actually, I have this last thing that I was going to show was this. So it's like types of self-care I found on a website. Let's see if I can pull it all up. And yes, boundaries are one of them. They're right there, actually. They're work boundaries, but I feel like they apply to all of the different self-care, because I feel like, so yeah, one of the things that I actually hadn't noticed is like, these are all very different. And sometimes we like to conflate and we like to take our work issues and make them personal and we take them home with us sometimes. And there is this thing in psychology, it's called stress transference, which I learned about, which was kind of cool, is that sometimes a stressful situation might occur. You might have a bad day at work and you will find another outlet for that stress. So, you know, suddenly you and your partner fighting over what we are having for dinner is going to pull in that stress that you had, and it will amplify that. And so your little problem that was not actually a problem, which is, you know, what are we having for dinner, becomes a problem. Whereas if you take a step back and realize, hey, I'm actually not in a great mood because of this situation, you can save yourself a lot of time by breaking it up into these little chunks. So
that's very interesting to think about, I think. Or even the opposite, where you take your personal shit into work. It's a hard thing, isn't it? I think like for me, like dysregulated emotions and stuff, like it's hard for me to separate sometimes. Sometimes it's like, oh, I had a great day at work or school, but now I have to go back home to a chaotic home environment. Shit. But sometimes then that's what's playing on your mind throughout the day at school or work. That's where I found sometimes, like, one thing of BPD is having a lack of sense of self. For the longest time, I didn't know which me was the real me, because I'd be with these very few healthy people. I was quite confident, I could laugh and things like that. Then I'd go back home, or I'd go to other friendships where I'd go back in on myself, and I'd be really quiet. I'd kind of let people kind of criticize me, and I just wouldn't say boo to a goose. Again, like, I think this is the other thing, like people be like, oh, well, because I think one of the comments, only people knew the real you. And I'm like, oh, do you mean like the me that was reactive to your bullshit? Like, found it was quite hard to be like, okay, which one is the actual me? Because I'm quite happy and lively with these people, but then with these other people, I'm very like disorganized. I'm very like within myself. So then, like, I find now that sometimes both will come out. So I think it's a trauma response sort of thing. So I could be having a good day, or then I will get like that negative comment on social media or something. Then I'll go into myself and be like, oh, scared. I'm a bad person, blah, blah.
God,
yeah. And so I think trying to separate things in different aspects of life is quite hard. I think also as well, because I lived in a small town, quite a lot of it would bleed into each other, because it's like, oh, I've gone out with a friend, but they're friends of this person that I went to school with who bullied me. They're going out
whose
with
mom knows my mom.
Yeah. And so, and like, I think one of the things I've said is that I would never be able to throw like a birthday party, because there's so many different me's that are with different people. I'm like, I have no idea how I'm going to be.
You should be happy to be alive. I mean, at the end of the day, like, you didn't have to be born, right? There was no magic palette, like little, box where you push a button and you popped out, right? Like, that's not how it works. And so I feel like you should enjoy and be thankful for what you have. And it sounds like you've done a lot of that exploring, and you kind of found what fits, and you should be happy where you are. I mean, the reality is, in 100 years, it's not going to matter, right? Like, you should be thankful and happy. And it's awesome that you put yourself out there, you got this relationship, you kind of figured out what you like to do. And, like, I saw your reaction video on Twitch to the Pokemon Scarlet Violet.
And that went completely wrong.
I did a little bit of research because I was like, wait, how old is he? What does he do? Like, what are some of his interests before I reach out as a stranger? I'll stalk him. And so, one of the things, I loved it. I loved that you were excited for the, was it the cat? No, the duck. You were excited for the duck because you like ducks. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, that there was some genuine happiness, and I was like, that's awesome that you found out what you like to a certain degree. And
yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part of it as well. I think through to my interests, whether that's like Pokemon, like video games and things like that, because again, like, I had a lot of people where they'd constantly mock that, and so for the longest time, like, oh, quite shameful to like this. Where I think now, again, like, I'm like, yeah, I like this, I don't care, like, I'm being happy. And I think, like, it's one of those petty things where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to be really happy to piss these people off that don't like me.
Don't even bother with that. No, it's not worth it. It's just
I mean, main thing is for myself, but like, it's a little bonus to be like, oh, they're going to be pissed off about it. I think this is, I think, like, it's having that safe space to have your voice be heard. I think that's the thing. I think going back to the beginning, where people feel lost or not heard, I think that's a lot of the issue when it comes to mental illness and stress and stuff, is that sometimes you feel like people aren't just listening, people are just not listening. Because, like, you can come out and say, oh, I'm feeling suicidal. They'll be like, okay, so what's getting you feel that way? But then if you're like, oh, I don't know, I just feel like it, they'll be like, oh, well, you're not giving us anything to work with. But I'm like, I'm literally still stating that I'm feeling that way. why do you need this massive kind of explanation as to why? We need to sort it out. Or often what would happen would be that, like, so I've had it before where I'd have to kind of relay what was going on multiple times to different doctors throughout the evening. And again, that makes it worse. I'm like, I'm pretty sure they just took notes like 10 minutes ago. Can you not ask them? Yeah, I don't know whether that's the same kind of like system where you are, but yeah, here it's like, okay, the ambulance people bring you in. Okay, so why has this happened? So you tell them, then you get taken to a ward, and they're like, okay, so what's this? And I'm like, and then someone else comes along because they're doing bloods or whatever. Oh, so why are you here? Is there not any communication between anybody here?
And you see like 5 different doctors. Sometimes you'll have that here.
And I think as well, I think the other confusion can be that you'll have one doctor say one thing, another doctor say another doctor saying another, or being like, oh, they got it, oh, you know, and I'm like, okay, so what's going on? They'll expect you to remember, and I'm like, I'm literally in crisis here. I'm not, I like, because my memory's shit anyway, but I'm not going to remember any of this tomorrow.
Yeah, can you get the notes?
Like, can you write a book for me, please? But yeah, I think again, like, these sort of conversations are very helpful on both sides.
Thank you so much for stopping by and chatting with me. This has been awesome. I'm so glad I was able to have this conversation, because I've wanted to do this, but doing it alone seemed weird. And I'm glad that you were able to infuse a lot of personal experiences.
Well, thanks for having me. Again, sorry that I've rambled on too much. That's another issue of like, don't talk too much.
Don't worry.
But thank you, and like, if you need anything else, just let me know, and probably talk over a Discord anyway.
Yeah.